be advised that this recorded webinar has been edited from its original format, which may have included a product demo. To set up a live demo or to request more information, please complete the form to the right. Or if you are currently not on CSC Global, there is a link to the website in the description of this video. Thank you.
Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Briefly Speaking, Information Security Essentials and the Benefits of Entity Management. My name is Caitlin Aliberta, and I will be your moderator. Joining us today is Helena Ledick, David Jeffries, and Mark Eggleston. Helena is an Associate General Counsel for CSC in the Chicago office. She is a business attorney with experience in negotiating commercial contracts, corporate governance, compliance, security, and privacy. David is a Senior Product Manager for Global Compliance and Governance Services at CSC in the Wilmington, Delaware headquarters. With CSC for over 14 years, he has significant experience providing training, implementation, and consultative services to clients of CSC Entity Management and consults with those evaluating CSC Matter Management solutions. Mark is the Chief Information Security Officer for CSC, responsible for the continual maturation of CSC's global security and privacy program design and operations. And with that, let's welcome Helena, David, and Mark.
Thank you, Caitlin, and thank you to the audience for joining us today on our webinar for Briefly Speaking, where we'll be discussing information security essentials and the benefits of entity management. Today, what we'll be doing is reviewing the importance of security in today's world, CSC Security Measures. We're going to look outside and we're going to discuss third-party security validation, entity management software advantages and considerations. We'll talk about CSC's entity management services and security features, and then we'll go into a Q&A session. And before we get into the information security essentials with entity management, let me tell you a little bit about CSC. We like to say that we're the business behind business, and we provide knowledge-based solutions to our clients. We work with more than 10,000 different law firms, 3,000 financial market customers, and 180,000 corporate customers. We work with more than 90% of the Fortune 500. So Mark now is going to take us through the information security essentials that we need to know about, what is happening in today's world, and how that affects entity management decisions.
Thanks, Helena. I probably don't need to tell any of the registrants today about how important security is, but I'm going to go ahead and say some of the things here to help us just get grounded on the importance of security. So you can see that security and cybersecurity is really, really hot. It's hard to pick up the daily paper without a mention on cyber, some nation-state attack, an article about increasing spend, rise in ransomware. You get it. It's big news. This top left quote really speaks to the threat of these attacks impacting people. That is social engineering, which is taking advantage of someone's trust. Security is really a cat and mouse type cycle, but the bad guys continue to bring taller ladders, so we must continue to bring and build taller walls. Take, for example, phishing social engineering. Gone are the days when you get a simple email attachment that would have a virus in there. The bad guys are much smarter now, and they're sending these attachments onto other places where you'll have to click or do a couple clicks to get through. So we, again, have to build stronger defenses. And speaking of people, ISC Squared, the folks that do the CISSP, or Certified in Information Security Systems Professional certification, they've gauged that the cybersecurity gap in 2020 is still at 3.1 million positions. So staffing and recruitment are often cited as the top CISO concern, because we have to have continually amounts of people to battle these nation-state attacks and the cyber criminals that are continuing to throw things our way. Because 85% of the breaches involve a human element. So a lot of times we have to take a human approach to fighting cybercrime.
Now what we're going to do is we're going to dig a little deeper into things. And Mark is going to take us actually through what CSC's security measures are.
So it's often said in enterprise technology, and especially security, that you get 3 resources to build a program. Those 3 resources are people, process, and technology. For this slide here, I'm going to talk a little bit about the processes that we have in place to help secure customer data. So first and foremost, our data centers around the world are SOC audited. The one I'm most vested in is a SOC 2, which helps us certify, via an expert third party, that we have the appropriate trust controls in place. These trust controls are around confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data. We also have stringent data controls, admin control, policies for how we grant access, such as who can authorize, how we document that for auditor reply. And as a bonus, we leverage identity and access management systems, which add a certain sense of efficiency and automation to the whole process. For business continuity, we've confirmed something called an RTO, a recovery timeframe objective, and then we test for an RTC, a recovery timeframe capability. In other words, if we say we're going to bring up a system in an hour, we test and make sure that we don't exceed that hour. External pen testings and things of that nature are also very helpful to making sure that we find faults before bad guys do. And this is in addition, of course, to our internal pen test, which helps us find some faults. The pen testing is actually trying to exploit those faults. With drills, we're getting ready for ransomware tabletop here in December. And how we're doing that is we're bringing in a trusted third-party facilitator with our top execs and other people to make sure that we know how to respond to any type of threat. For example, a ransomware threat, making sure we understand the timeline for decisions, who's got what, and making sure we have an effective response for if things do go bad. We also have trusted partner to help us with something called DOS, or denial of service, which basically makes sure they're monitoring and defending our front door to ensure the application has maximum uptime. I also want to mention here that with the pandemic, our COVID response we were able to use some of our business continuity plans to make sure that we empowered our global workforce to work from home promptly, so our continued operations didn't have a blip in service.
The next item on our agenda is discussing the third-party security validation. So that looking outside, and then Mark's going to take us through this.
Thanks, Selena. So in the prior slide, we talked a little bit about processes. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about technology. This is where the technologists and a lot of us really seem to get excited. So for technology, you can see these concentric circles here on the slide, which is basically showing you that the crown jewels, the most valuable data we have lots of layers and securities to help us protect this. We refer to this as defense in depth, but you might better think of it as, well, your front door. Your front door has a deadbolt and a locked doorknob, and that's there because if one fails, you still have the other providing some level of protection. In fact, some of us even have a third layer, such as a burglar alarm, for additional protection. Well, CSC is no different. We have designed our technical controls with redundancy and resiliency in mind. For example, we regularly scan for both operating system and our own apps and third-party vulnerabilities and work with various groups to ensure patches and configuration changes are made to protect customer data. While this isn't the most glamorous job in security, it's a lot like being a janitor, it's paramount and foundational, includes a lot of testing and collaboration. In addition to legacy antivirus, we also use anti-malware, which is able to catch and contain more advanced persistent threats. It's looking for behaviors that are known or suspect to be bad, or any kind of unusual system activity, so we can promptly explore that and see what we need to do, either block that or warn for that type of activity. We search for specific data terms as well to minimize data loss to unauthorized channels, both inadvertent and on purpose, and have both agent and web-based technology, which helps protect our employee workstations at all times, whether they're on the network or not. We also partner with a globally recognized managed security services firm using industry-proven log analysis and technology to watch our systems 24/7, 365 days, because our internal staff must sleep, and we also like to have the external third-party assistance, making sure we're not missing anything and continue to keep an eye on the threats that matter. We also use a variety of other technology to look for vulnerable code and configuration issues and find these before the bad guys do. This is really important to stay ahead in today's cyber world. So let's talk a little bit about third-party management. Probably many of you have likely heard about things that happened the last year or so. Colonial Pipeline, SolarWinds, Kaseya. These are all attacks that had a supplier chain impact, or rather with a downstream entity because they were hacked or compromised, and by association, the companies using these products were negatively impacted. So reviewing all downstream associations to ensure your privacy and security terms convey is really important. Just like we get evaluated by our customers, we also evaluate at acquisition and monitor our customers and partners and vendors with various subscriptions. Things our office, or security office does rather, we tier vendors for risk, make sure we prioritize the efforts to reduce risk. We ensure federation for ease of sign-on and ease of prompt removal of sign-ons when people leave the company. We also ensure encryption and prompt incident reporting is in place as well, and make sure that there's no significant changes between the last review with some of those subscriptions that do more continuous monitoring. Where applicable, vulnerability assessments, penetration testing, these controls are also used to make sure that, again, we find faults before our adversaries do. All right, so I'm going to continue talking about some of the technology controls we alluded to earlier. So additional security controls that we use for the folks that are handling your data is making sure that we have strong access controls in place, such as really strong passwords. We have strong expectations from our customers, so we typically take the strongest and apply that across the board. So we have very complex passwords. In addition, we're using two-factor authentication. Some of you might refer to it as multi-factor authentication to help us ensure that people are who they say they are. We're using that for anybody who's wishing to get in from the outside. We also have Password Manager. We use this for some situations where we might not have a federation in control. In other words, an automated way to log onto an application. And a Password Manager is great, so your workforce isn't compelled to write down their password. In prior lives, I've audited workspaces, and you lift up a keyboard, you lift up a mouse pad, and you see a little sticky note with passwords, so it helps prevent that no-no. Anti-phishing tests and impersonation blocking. I'm sure a lot of workforce folks listening in get this now and probably resent these tests, but we do that to make sure people are always on the alert and are on and taught what things to look out for and what makes a bad email. And we'll also have technology controls that are continuing to make sure that we stop impersonation controls. These are the things where you get an outside email, but it looks like an inside email asking for information or asking someone to pay an invoice. So we have some specialized controls that help detect and block that. Of course, we're always looking into the latest and greatest anti-malware settings, both on the endpoint and across our network, to help us do better intrusion protection and continue to get stronger and stronger. We have a very much state-of-the-art security operations center, so I alluded to earlier, with 24/7, 365 coverage. And we're also using some very next-gen advanced tools to help us do more effective threat hunting. A lot of times security operations centers get a high ratio of false positive events, or events that might look like something but in fact are not a security threat. So we found it very helpful to make sure that we're getting the best vendors to do a really good job of help separating the signal from the noise ratio in these detection technologies. And last but not least, we're continually doing regular education, making sure our workforce really keeps security hygiene top of mind at all times. In addition, some of the other security controls that we're using here at CSC, we like to have full encryption at rest. This is really important for your mobile devices. In other words, when you have these devices in a non-trusted setting or a setting that's not monitored, it's really important that laptops, mobile devices have all that customer data encrypted at rest. So we ensure that we have that in place. Also continually do single sign-on support. So we work to make sure that our workforce just has to remember one password, or at least that one password can open up the password manager for the few systems that need it still. We also have breach password detection. This is really important. There's sites out there now, for example, haveibeenpawned.com, which you can use to help see if your password has been dumped into the darknet, a place where cyber criminals go to get these type of credentials. So in part of our systems, we're able to do a lookup to make sure that people aren't using or replaying those passwords that have already been breached. We also have a formal authorization process that I alluded to earlier for identity and access management that really just helps us make sure that only authorized people get authorized access into our applications. And lastly, we have application and data level security controls in place. As security has continued to follow where the data is and where people are working from the pandemic, we understand that we just can't continue to just have our security controls look at the workspace setting. We have to now look at the cloud and look at their home offices. So if we start to tag the data with certain security controls, that those data security controls follow the user wherever they're working. So that's something we're continuing to build up and make sure that our security program stays robust. Thank you.
We've heard from Mark about all of the security considerations that go into entity management and certainly also any vendor management program. But now David's going to actually take us through entity management software, the advantages and the considerations.
Thanks, Elena. The first thing that I'd like to do is to make sure that we're really all on the same page when we talk about entity management, because really it's a term that can mean different things to different people. And so really, I think in the broadest sense, entity management is a discipline that involves, if nothing else, keeping entities in compliance, which could be at the Secretary of State level if we're talking about a U.S. subsidiary, or maybe an international business registry if we're talking about a non-U.S. company. Certainly it does go beyond that as well. So fundamentally, entity management involves record keeping of data, critical documents, the ability to generate structure charts, and commonly what we see is that the corporate legal department bears the brunt of the responsibility of managing this compliance, but it's also a situation where other stakeholders and other parts of the organization are also involved as well, whether that's tax or finance or treasury. So it really is a team sport in terms of keeping entities in good standing and in compliance. And then also notably, entity management also involves being able to surface information, again, whether that's to internal or external stakeholders, in the moment, being able to have immediate access to that information in a secure fashion, which we'll talk more about in the slides to come. So what are some of the advantages to having an entity management software application? So a moment ago, we were talking about entity management sort of in the abstract as a discipline, but now we're really shifting gears and talking about what could be described as specialized software that helps us actually manage entities. And so there are a number of advantages. Some of these themes I talked about a moment ago in terms of being able to collaborate outside of the legal department, being able to surface information. But fundamentally, I've talked with a lot of organizations over the years that have evaluated CSC for entity management software that have not had a real solution, so to speak, in place. They were using spreadsheets to track data. Documents are typically on shared drives. Org charts are being designed in programs like PowerPoint or Visio, and really fundamentally what they find is that they do not have a single source of truth where people can go and have clear transparency and visibility to information and the health and status of their companies. And so really they're working out of a siloed fractured environment, which creates a number of challenges. Also, the really strong entity management platforms on the market will really grow beyond being simply a repository, which in and of itself is critical, certainly, but really they'll start to introduce what I would describe as automation, the ability to click a button and get visualization of your org charts, the ability to click a button and see a report of all your upcoming compliance obligations or your current status, let's say at the Secretary of State level. And so, again, it really goes beyond having just a repository, but having some of that automation built in. Also, and we'll segue into talking about some of CSC's capabilities specifically, but the more modern entity management platforms often have integrations as well in a couple of fashions. One with a registered agent provider, so that if you're using a registered agent to form entities or dissolve companies, the results of those filings actually can be automatically recognized and updated in the entity management software. So seeing that new company in the case of a formation, or seeing that entity status marked to inactive in the case of a dissolution, and then having what we often describe as the filing evidence, i.e. the documents that come back as a result of that filing automatically associated with those companies. And so instead of sort of working in a standalone platform where as the legal department you're really responsible for manually updating everything on your own, the more modern entity management platforms introduce a level of efficiency by automating the flow of data and documents into the platform so that organizations can build on top of that information, again, in a secure fashion.
David has walked us through the advantages of actually having entity management software. And now what he's going to do is he's going to take us into the CSC's entity management services and security features.
Thanks, Helena. I am very excited for the opportunity to talk about our award-winning entity management software, but really what I want to do is take not necessarily a step back, but I do want to talk first about some of the compliance services that CSC offers. Really a sort of cornerstone offering for CSC, really since our inception as an organization, is the registered agent service, where CSC is responsible for receiving and forwarding electronic service of process, or what we call SOP. That is perhaps the most thought of role of a registered agent, but really there's another part of that coin, which is handling entity compliance. And so when CSC serves in the capacity of a registered agent for a U.S. subsidiary, there's a lot of information about that entity that we represent that we become aware of, and that also flows automatically into our platform that we call CSC Navigator. Things like the name of that company, where it's formed, other jurisdictions where it might be qualified, dates of registration, charter IDs, statuses. We have a dynamic compliance calendar that automatically creates insights into when the next set of annual filings, like annual reports, are coming due for that company. We talked about entity management, if nothing else, being the discipline or the practice of keeping companies in good standing. And then we also have an array of resources to assist our clients, whether they're looking to do filings themselves or need other sort of jurisdictional knowledge that's available through the CSC Global website. But it really starts foundationally for U.S. companies with CSC acting as registered agent. So on the prior slide, we were talking about registered agent being a core CSC service offering for U.S. companies. But registered agent, interestingly, it's pretty much a U.S. construct. There are a few other parts of the world where a registered agent is a thing, so to speak, but really outside of the United States, you're really getting more into what are described as corporate secretarial services. And CSC proudly offers a suite of services that we call Global Subsidiary Management, which effectively is our compliance offering where we, quote unquote, represent or act as a company secretary for organizations, and that's an offering that we have in over 140 jurisdictions. And just a couple of quick things to mention about that service. It's also foundational to what we do in the realm of entity management. It really starts with what we call a corporate health check. So CSC will do a research project essentially to understand the current health and status of our global entities, present that to you, and if there are any remedial actions that would be necessary to bring an entity back into good standing, that's work that we can take on for your organization. And then really the centerpiece, if you will, of our Global Subsidiary Management Service is what we call annual compliance support, where CSC is doing all of the prescribed annual filings, sort of the equivalents of annual reports globally, and handling other obligations that are due on an annual basis to, again, keep your companies around the world in compliance. And then we also offer what we could describe as change management services. So for example, you might need to do a director change, or you might have the need to form or dissolve entities. And so just as we can handle those entity filings here in the US, we certainly can accommodate them globally as well. And the great strength of this service is that all of the work that CSC does on your behalf globally flows automatically into our entity management platform, which I'll talk about in more detail in just a moment. So now that we've had the opportunity to talk a bit about CSC's compliance services, again, registered agent in the U.S., global subsidiary management or corporate secretarial services outside of the U.S., let's talk about the software itself, which is what this slide starts to depict. And so CSC has, as I noted before, an award-winning platform that offers an array of capabilities. And so, again, one of the most critical things to start with is that understanding that with CSC as your compliance partner in the States or outside of the U.S., information is flowing into the system automatically. Names of companies, where they're doing business, statuses, compliance events, and fundamentally, critically, the reason organizations subscribe to our entity management software is they want to build on top of that strong, vetted foundation of information. They want to start tracking director and officer information. They want to track ownership records that allows them to click a button and have the system generate visual org charts. They want to be able to track custom information. And so that's really a hallmark of the entity platform, is just how configurable the solution is. So for example, one organization might need to track fund identifiers for the companies. Another organization might want to make sure that they're tying entities to certain regions of the world for reporting and tracking purposes. And so it's incredibly configurable in terms of the ability to track an unlimited amount of information in the platform. We have really robust document management capabilities. Clients can drag and drop documents into the system. We have automated full text searching. So for example, anytime you might upload a PDF document into the platform, if you are a user that also has the ability to view documents, you can do a search and find documents based on the contents of those documents, which we render automatically searchable as a part of the import process. We also, for publicly traded U.S. organizations, have a Section 16 filer. So if you have obligations with the SEC, there is a built-in mechanism to allow you to submit those forms electronically through the system as well. And then reporting, it's sort of the last bullet point here, but maybe it's as critical as any, which is the ability to very easily aggregate and surface information. So I click a button, I've got a list of active directors and officers, or as of a point in time. I could click a button and get a list of upcoming compliance obligations, or a list of ownership records or doing business as names. All of the information, whether it's standard information or, again, some of the custom information that you may have entered into the platform, it's all searchable, sortable, and reportable. At the beginning of today's webinar, we talked extensively about security in terms of a number of the processes and technologies that CSC has in place to fundamentally make sure that we're keeping bad actors away from your data. And so there's, again, third-party assessments that occur to make sure that we're maintaining an incredibly secure environment for the information that our clients entrust to CSC. But what we're going to do here is talk about security through a slightly different lens. And the idea here is that I'm an organization that is subscribing to the entity management platform so that I can manage my entity data, documents, and charts, etc. And I do wish to give access to the database to members of my team, maybe even external parties, but I really want to do that in a secured, controlled fashion. So this is really what this slide is detailing. So there's a couple of things that I'll highlight here. Number one, as an administrative user, you would have the ability to see and do everything. You can create custom fields, upload documents, run charts, etc. But then when it comes to the rest of your users, you're able to determine at a very granular level, what can they see, what can't they see? So for example, maybe one user has the authority to view directors' officers, but you're not going to let that person look at your electronic minute books. Maybe a user has the authority to only see entities in a certain region of the world. So it's very, again, granular is probably the word I would keep coming back to make sure that people can only see and do what you feel is appropriate. Also, when you click on a particular company, there's different sections of information which you can set up and establish. And for example, I might have a whole section of tax fields or treasury fields or finance fields, but again, I might only open up that area of the database to folks in those respective business units and not give that full view to every user that accesses a particular company in the system. Earlier, I was talking a bit about some of the document management capabilities, the ability to drag and drop documents, the ability to search against the contents of those documents, but we also support what's described as folder level security, where effectively down to the folder level, you can determine what documents someone would or would not see. So as an example, in an electronic minute book, I could have a folder for articles, a different folder for bylaws, kind of, my charter documents. I could have another folder for minutes. And maybe I might say, well, when this user logs in, that's great. Let them see articles, let them see bylaws. That's all well and good. But let's make the minutes folder and any documents in that folder completely invisible to that person because it's beyond what's appropriate for that person. And then the last thing that's talked about here is what we call dynamic entity preferences. I alluded to this a moment ago, but when you log in as an admin, you're seeing every entity, but maybe for other users, it's down to a single entity that they can see, or entities in a certain fund or business unit or division or part of the world. So you have the controls, and it's very efficient in terms of how you can set this up and maintain it to make sure that users are only accessing the entities that you deem appropriate within the technology.